What's up? Happy New Year. If you guys are listening to this, it's actually the week after New Year. I'm here with Danielle. Danielle, I don't want to butcher your last name. How do you pronounce it?
It's a Carnivele.
Okay, so it's phonetic. I was like, I think it sounds like
Yeah.
it's Carnivele. So yeah, Danielle, why don't you introduce yourself, name, a little about yourself, what you do, all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dylan. Well, I'm Danielle Carnivele. I'm a life coach here in LA. I actually started out though in marketing. I've kind of followed that path of school, college, business job. And it led me really quickly to burnout because it didn't let I kind of got to a point with myself where I wasn't happy and I was kind of
Yeah,
living this life that worked so hard and just kind of trying to work so hard for what? And it kind of
yeah,
got to a point where my physical health was starting to get affected by that,
yeah.
where we had to like reset and revisit. And that brought me into life coaching through a year in therapy and figuring out all these realizations that have made me realize that I'm not the only one struggling in this point. I think especially straight out, like straight fresh out of college, we have a lot of people that want to have those fresh eyes, those fresh minds,
Yeah,
and we're just trying to prove ourselves and leveling up, and we're not focused on how to take care of ourselves. So
100%.
when I was going through therapy, it kind of forced me to reel it back and to reset that foundation of
Hmm.
what's going to make me happy at the end of the day. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
oh, sorry, interject. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep going. That
no,
was
you're
really
good. I was just wrapping up.
no, no, go, finish.
Oh, no, I was just saying then throughout those realizations and how I was able to make myself feel better. I always say I was very like a very extreme businessy kind of person. So to
Yeah.
dial it back and to focus on self-love kind of seemed nearly impossible at that point. And helping people is something that I've been able to do since then through life coaching, and it's been very rewarding to just see people feel better about themselves. So
Totally.
yeah.
100%. Sorry, I'm like the worst interviewer ever.
You're
But
totally good. You're excited. I
but
love that.
I'm so excited. No, and I'm so excited to have you on here. I've been listening to your podcast. If you guys listen to podcasts, Make It Make Sense by Danielle. It's so freaking good. Um, and there was so many things I was like just relating and vibing with you, and I'm like, yeah. And I've done like a lot of personal development stuff. I've done like Landmark, if you know Landmark out here. I've done
Oh yeah.
MITT. Yeah, so I've done those two. But I feel like you kind of need to be reminded more than to be taught. And so that's why I'm so excited
Yeah.
for you to come on so I can personally, selfishly get like reinvigorated. But also I think for a lot of our listeners, it's like I always say it's 80% nutrition, 20% training, and 100% mental. So I think there's so many things you can really help our listeners with. And your whole, and I know I'm ranting right now and I'm interviewing you, so I'm so sorry. But when you were talking about, I was like, when you were talking about going to college and then graduating and becoming like just very career driven, did you so you graduated and you went to marketing and you were like, that's kind of where you were at and just trying to climb the social ladder, or what happened there?
Yeah, so I went to school for advertising, and it kind of
Mhm.
was like one of those things where after you switch a couple of majors, you're like, this will work.
Yeah.
Then right after college, I got a job during the pandemic that let me move to California from the
Yeah.
Midwest. So in there, I was like, I felt this need because I was so grateful to be there. I felt so cool to be there, and a little bit of imposter syndrome kicked in. So I think that's where that extra drive of I need to like prove myself here,
Hmm.
which did work, but it didn't at the cost of my mental health,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was just a sense of this is where I feel is right. It didn't really feel where my heart was, but it just
Right.
felt like, okay, logically, this is what I'm supposed to do. This fits the realistic plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like I was thinking about have you seen Fight Club before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So there's this part in Fight Club, you have to watch it. Great movie. It's a classic, but Brad Pitt's character is like I think he's like a soap salesman. I think that's his whole thing and he has like underground Fight Club. But he was talking to this guy about like his journey and how he opened a fight club and he was like, I asked my dad, what should I do? And he's like, I don't know, go to college. And then and then after I went to college, I was like, well, what do I do now? He's like, I don't know, get a job. And it's like that
Exactly.
path, it's like that's kind of what is ingrained and expected of us. Obviously, it might be a little bit less now, but how did you kind of get, obviously you had your own journey. Maybe you could tell us a little about your own journey and kind of how you got involved with life coaching.
Yeah, so actually when I started going to college, I was originally in for psychology, and then just
Hmm.
because personal things, I fell out of that, started business and going into through that route. So when I was starting to like repivot my life and needing to look at my health in this new light, it really took being more compassionate with myself. My therapist really had to help me through that a lot because
Yeah.
I think just in general, we're taught to self blame and to self hate over be compassionate and be kinder to ourselves.
Yeah.
So that in its own had to be a complete mindset shift in, okay, how am I speaking to myself? How am I like taking care of myself essentially? And almost kind of looking at it as like, okay, well, this is what I know doesn't work for me. How can I repivot it and to start to just choose better ways for myself by doing what's healthier and making
Yeah.
that the primary focus on it?
Y-
And a lot of like self-talk, self-compassion, it kind of took me back to psychology when I was taking earlier classes in my college career and being like, oh, okay. And almost like those real life examples are now being implemented in my day to day to help understand, I guess, why I do the things I do. That's why I kind of called the podcast Make It Make Sense. It's like make this mindset that got you here make sense on why you did it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was always wondering, I'm like, what is it? What is like maybe that's like her philosophy or something. That's really interesting to know. I didn't know that's why you called it that.
Yeah, because I do think our reality and like what we consider to be realistic or logical that sort of
Yeah.
limits our lives, it is based on just ideas that are preconceived that we've had. It's basically our imagination telling us what we can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And it's literally just the world or life just proving to us if we can or can't do it.
Yeah.
So I like to say just as bad as something can happen, something good can happen to you too.
Totally. And I think like, with our clients specifically and anyone just in a health journey, it's like that like there's no reason that you can't do what you want to do, and have like but I feel like we get into this zone of kind of like just in our own head and thinking like, oh, I can't do this, it's too hard. It's like, well, if anyone can do it, it's you. Like, look at all the and I know you're talking about this on your podcast. You're like, look at all the hard shit that you've done in your life and how you've gotten to where you've gotten to because it all makes sense.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's cool how but tell because you were talking about your childhood. Well, I maybe didn't talk about your childhood, but I remember you were talking about just now you were saying, I was going through these stuff and feeling a certain way and um but you used a word in your podcast. You're like, I felt like a burden growing up. Did you feel like a lot of the stuff that you were going through mentally on your own journey kind of were from childhood, or like how did that all come to fruition there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of what we feel is wrong with us, we like to say, is reverts back to something we felt as children.
Yeah.
I think especially with my childhood specifically, the way my family kind of operated, I felt like more of like an outcast, like kind of on the sidelines. So a lot of like there was a lot of anger, a lot of like violence in my family growing up. So
Mhm.
as a kid, we're taught to almost internalize things when we don't have answers. So I was like an older sibling too, so I had this responsibility to take care of my younger sibling. And through that, it kind of put me in this, well, I'm the problem. I need to fix things. And because that was never addressed to me directly, I didn't go to therapy when I was younger. It was
Mhm.
just kind of carried with me throughout life. And when I
Right.
was in therapy for my job and recovering from burnout, a lot of the things that I felt so much were wrong with me were feelings that I've held on to since I was a kid. And and it's like very basic stuff. You could be like, even communication can be something that was affected when you're a kid because you were afraid to speak up for something,
Yeah.
to ask for to make yourself feel less scared, help you understand things. And if you don't have a parental figure or someone to guide you through it, you're just going to stay confused and stay that scared little kid again.
Right.
It takes learning and understanding and being compassionate with yourself to reparent you through those difficult times.
Yeah, it's like you can't just like band-aid it, and just like white knuckle through all this stuff until you really address. It's like someone explained to me it was kind of like if you're in a car and you have a bunch of shit in the back seat, and it's
Yeah.
like when you do therapy or you really address it, it's like you slam on the brakes and all the stuff in the back seat comes up and you like get to clean it up, in a sense. I thought that was
Exactly.
like such a good analogy. But
Yeah, I've never heard that one before. I love that though.
who do you work with typically? Like I know you by the way, if you guys are listening, Danielle has a weekly episode, Spotify, iTunes, right? Both those two.
Yeah.
Is it YouTube as well?
Apple, yeah, Spotify and iTunes right now, but
Okay.
hopefully it's expanding.
Pause this, go into your iTunes, go into your Spotify, and go to Make It Make Sense by Danielle. It's really good. You have about 35 episodes out, 34, I think.
Yeah, 34 this week. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how real you are. That's great. I think it's like you're just sharing so much of your personal journey and just being real about everything. But I cut you off. Who do you work with? Who do you like to work with typically?
So I primarily work with women in their mid to late 20s,
Hmm.
but mainly anyone just trying to look to feel better about themselves, whether it be
Yeah.
in their career, in their personal life, and just helping them work through those difficult times and what they're trying to overcome like currently and
Yeah.
where they want to get to. And I think a lot of it is, like I said, going back to childhood and really
Hmm.
visiting those areas of your life. And what I found a lot is people have a lot of guilt on not wanting to put blame on their past for the reason why they can't move forward. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is we have to acknowledge our past to grow through that and learn from those experiences so we know how to handle them for the future and for even the present and how to move
Yeah.
forward.
And I
So,
was just thinking about something while you were talking there. I have a client. I've had a lot of clients, who grew up in poverty or whose parents weren't around a ton, and so food was always very not accessible, it wasn't there. So now they have like this weird relationship with food where every time they get it, they think they like have to eat it, like, finish their plate, eat it all, like that it's going to disappear. And I guess, since obviously this is going to be person to person, but like kind of general, maybe you can help our listeners understand, like, how would you address something like that in your childhood to really overcome that currently, so don't don't overeat and comfort eat and like just all that stuff.
yeah, well, I think food is such a complicated relationship for so many just because in
So
the
complicated.
way. Right? It's like it's such like an essential part of life and we all know that, but we all have our if different unique relationship with food. And
Hmm.
I always like to say like no one should judge anyone for what they eat or how they like to eat something. Like
Yeah.
everyone's entitled to enjoy the thing that nourishes them. But I think with something like that, especially with food scarcity, it's important to keep in mind that you're the adult now. You're the one taking care of you now. It's not mom and dad who are like rationing or portioning your plate. Like, you know, you're going to feed yourself every night because you're taking on that responsibility. You're the one working, you're the one putting money on the table, you're the one going to the grocery store and taking accountability for that, but also acknowledging that what your happened in your past was hard and it was a
Yeah.
struggle and it did affect the way you think now.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I think speaking kinder to yourself and being like, well, you don't have to eat all of this now. You could
Right.
put it stored for leftovers later if
Yeah.
that, yeah.
And I know you have your own journey with food and relationship. And I remember on your podcast, you're like, the difference between like addiction with drugs and alcohol and and food is like, if you quit drugs and alcohol, you're not gonna have to ever do that again. If you if you have like an addiction with food or some unhealthy relationship, like you still have to eat to live,
Yeah,
So it's like this thing that still has to be in your life. So it's like, okay, how can we like make peace with food and use it in a way that's going to be conducive to whatever our goals are, just to fuel our body or be healthier.
exactly. I think it definitely takes looking at food in a new light, essentially, as it's not like this substance that's gonna make me feel better. It's something that I'm going to enjoy and it's good for my body because it's nourishing. And almost like shift that perspective of being a comfort tool versus something that you need for actual survival.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know if you read intuitive eating or mindful eating, but it's like very analogous to like that exactly. It's just like making peace with food again and like using it in a way that's going to be nourishing and not looking at it like, I feel like, because I know you have your own background. I don't know, can I share yours? Because you talked about it in your
Yeah.
podcast. So you
Yeah, no, of
had
course. Sorry,
yeah,
I felt
you
this.
had an ED, not not the erectile dysfunction, but you had an ED. I don't know if I can say that actually on the waves without us getting like, taken down. But yeah, you had some
Monetized.
stuff that you were struggling with your food. Maybe you can kind of talk about that a little bit and like how that came about, you feel like, and kind of how you were able to move past that yourself.
Yeah, so I have an eating disorder for the past 17 years is something I've been working through.
Yeah.
And it started a lot from like childhood and understanding what started that. Especially the eating disorder I struggled with was with anorexia. So
Mhm.
in that, I think it almost like shifted the tone of how it was perceived. I also had friends that were like very closely related to that were kind of struggling with drug addiction at the same time. And
Mhm.
just looking at the similarities and how we both felt this pain that was soothed through them with drugs and me with starvation almost.
Right.
Where it wasn't like it wasn't food that I was craving. It wasn't even looking at food as like this is something I need to live. it's something it's like, I don't need it to live. I need something else that food is almost feel like taking the place of, it felt like. And what kind of got to my mind is a lot of guilt around food, especially with food preparation, the cost of food, and taking that back to childhood. It's like this is something that was a burden to my parents, and
Yeah.
food like associated being a burden instead of something I need to survive. So kind of having that philosophy since I was 9 years old, that's like my bread and butter of life, kind of. And I guess throughout life, just kind of learning different relationships with food, like through my friends, through other family members, it helped me understand that food is much more than just something that you eat 3 times a day.
Yeah.
It's something that you can enjoy, that's meant to be enjoyed, that's meant to have flavor, that's meant to have culture. And it's more than just this substance that I'm using to feel more control in my life. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is such an interesting thing because, like, when you're doing it, like, it feel like big picture, because I used to go on, like, binges and have a binge
Mhm.
eating disorder or anything like that, but I'd go on, like, really heavy binges, and it's something I've struggled with, like, in my teens and all the way up to, like, mid-30s even. But,
Mhm.
it was really hard to break that cycle, and, every time I dieted, it would make it even worse. It would, like, exacerbate the issue there, and, I feel like anytime that you restrict something or make, like, rules on something, it just swings in the other way, but
Gosh, yeah.
I like, I guess what was I gonna say? Like, is comfort eating, for example,
Mhm.
like, what are your kind of your tips or kind of like maybe you can give us a bigger perspective on why that happens and like what we can do instead of of like because my point was like you're not you feel it feels out of control, but in the moment when you're eating on that food, I feel so much more in control. You know what I mean? And you're getting like a physiological dopamine hit, like you were talking about. But what are some things like we can do to kind of, maybe break away from that using food as like a medicine almost like in a not good way, like using it as like you know, like changing
Right.
your psychological state. Like what would you I'll shut
Well,
up.
I think just finding like other interests that you have, like what are other ways you can occupy your mind? I think especially with like when we restrict our food, it almost makes us want it more, right? Like when we can't have something when someone tells us no, we want it more.
Totally.
So when we think of diet culture, even limiting what we can eat or even labeling foods as being good or bad, when we do that, we kind of change that mindset that we're either being good by eating healthy foods or we're being bad by giving into these comfort foods.
Yeah.
So I think when we kind of let ourselves have those little comfort foods in moderation to have that enjoyment, we can almost want it less in bigger portions where we can see binge or even just feeling that guilt when we want to have cheat days even.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of times too, like it is a comfort tool when we want to feel better, we eat something. So it's almost like a mindset change. Like, what else is going to make you feel better other than this food? Like, is it going outside? Is it writing? Is it reading a book? Is it watching a show, calling a friend, and
Yeah.
just finding different little things of happiness that set your heart on fire, I like to say, that you could pivot to almost.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
a lot of the times when I was, like, struggling with that, I would just, like, go outside, go for a walk, or go for a drive, I think was, like, one of my go-tos for a long, long time. Just to, like, preoccupy my mind in a different way that I didn't feel was hurting myself anymore.
That's so cool that you were able to find that and like really able to not like go in that direction of going down what was really like it's hurting ourselves, which is such a interesting it's the opposite of what we're trying to do. Like, oh, we're like,
Right.
I'm, comforting myself and comfort eating. It's like actually like in the long run after that second of you eating, like you feel horrible. It's like the opposite. Um,
Exactly.
what do you like? A lot of people mentally either have like more of an all in all out mindset where they're all in. They're like, oh, I'm gonna do this. They're executing everything, and then they're like, oh, like I'm the complete opposite, and really not seeing in the gray area. Like, do you work with a lot of people with that kind of mindset, or what's your experience with that, and kind of like breaking free of that?
Yeah, I do actually work with a lot of people in that way, and I think it's almost hard not to think that way to some degree.
Yeah,
It's like, I think when we are feeling bad about ourselves, we want that instant gratification to feel better and to do something that's gonna change that, and a lot of times taking those steps to make that change, it's gonna take time, and when we're not seeing those results immediately, especially with something with health and fitness, where we want to see that immediate change in our bodies, we get frustrated, we get discouraged, and we're all in 1 week. And because we're not seeing the results, we're giving up and we're quitting because it's all
Yeah.
too much and it wasn't even worth it. So I think it takes a lot of just being patient with yourself and learning how to be okay with the uncomfortable point and
Yeah.
that like gray area where you're
Yeah.
like unsure if it's working, unsure if it's not, but you're still just figuring it out. And I think the best way to do that is through learning that you're going to take care of yourself because you trust yourself
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah, I think trusting yourself is so huge, and I think a lot of the people that have that kinda all in all mindset really are hyper focused on I don't know if you have the same experience on the end result, or just, like, thinking about it too much.
Yeah. Yeah,
How do you
absolutely.
become how do you become more process oriented and more, like, habit oriented instead of, like, results oriented?
I think ultimately it does take you back to learning how to take care of yourself and trusting yourself because in
Mhm.
that knowing you're going to trust yourself to take care of your most basic needs, which is meeting your most basic health goals and
Yeah.
what that means just to like take care of yourself to survive. Like
Yeah.
what food you need, how much sleep you need, what's going to get you out of uncomfortable situations. And through that, you're setting yourself that foundation of trust where you're like, okay, I know what my basics are. How can I up level myself? And when you up level yourself, you're taking those steps that maybe they are more extreme or maybe they're just baby steps that are going to take you into that gray area. And you're going to know that if this works, I know that this is the path for me. And if not, I know how to take myself out of the situation and still feel safe and sure about it. And just know that it's not like one way that you were like, oh, it's a failure. It's just a way that you discovered doesn't work for you. And
Yeah.
knowing that's a point of learning versus something that you failed at, I think. And
Mm.
changing that almost, I guess, word of saying failure versus this is something I tried that didn't work.
Right, right, or looking at it as like, "Oh, this didn't work this way, but, like, if I try this way," you know? I think there's, like, a saying that insanity is the same trying the same thing over and over again with the different results, like, well, yeah, but, like, I feel like it's also kind of like grit too, because like, if you're trying the same thing over and over again, like, it doesn't maybe you can have a different approach or maybe something's not working, but if you keep trying it and you keep messing up, like, that's just like life, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, because that's just part of life. It's even like I've said in my podcast before, like when you look back on everything you've achieved so far, like if you told yourself when you're like 5 years old that that's everything you have to do, are you going to do it again? And it's probably not because you can't expect the ups and the downs with everything.
Yeah.
And it's just trusting yourself you're going to get yourself through it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of executive, like, very high level people with families, and they're, like, so spread thin. They're, like, with their families and their kids, and then they're at this high level job where they're working, like, 10, 12 hours. They're trying to have it all, and they're like, "Oh, I want my health too," and it's like, kinda like, even for me, like, how do you balance, like, those spinning plates, it feels like, where they're just like, "Family, like, my health, my work," like, how do you kinda balance that and kinda get everything you want out of each part, really?
Yeah, I know because it feels like there's so much going on because we're only like one person sometimes, right? And we're only
Yeah,
human. We want to make everyone happy.
yeah,
I always like to say like this cup analogy where it's like you gotta think of yourself of having like a full cup and that's like all of your energy and you're choosing how you're going to distribute it. So if you're going to give a little bit to family, give a little bit to work, you have to know when your cup is empty so you can take that energy back for yourself and
mm,
take that time for yourself and know that it's okay to be selfish every now and then. But to know that when you're selfish, you're also gonna replenish yourself for other people and for the people you care and that you love.
yeah,
Um, I think too, like with people pleasers, like I like that was my biggest problem. Was like, oh, I'm gonna let everyone else down. I can't possibly take that much time for myself. You can't be yourself. You can't be show up 100% if you are on empty all the time and if you're
mhm,
constantly from an empty cup.
yeah.
And I think when you kind of put in that perspective, it's like I have to be selfish for the people I love.
For sure. I think moms, we work with a lot of moms, and I feel like moms specifically, like, they feel so selfish, like,
Yeah.
doing anything for themselves, especially working moms, because like, oh, they have their job, they have this. Like, how do you kind of break free of that mindset of not feeling like, I know you were saying you just kind of picture your cup. Do you have any other tips that are like super helpful for people that feel like they are being selfish by like helping themselves out?
Yeah, Well, I always like to kind of put it in perspective because, like, I had a very much of a workaholic mom, and I know how that affected me growing up and having
Mm,
absence. So when I was like going through like these motions of okay, like how am I not being selfish? I kind of would think of that mindset, and I'm not fully going to be present. Like I could show up, I could be physically present, but I'm not going to be emotionally present with the people I love, and that's what I think is the most concrete when it comes to relationships, when it comes to, especially with our family and with the people we care about, and even
mhm.
at work where we're not mentally all there. I think we focus too much on our physical presence needing to be the priority to show up, that we're not focusing on how our emotional presence is impacting the people we care about.
Yeah. Which brings me to my next question. I was like burning to ask you this. Boundaries. Like how do you put those down? And like some, I'm sure in your own journey and with your clients, like you have to have healthy boundaries. And with our clients, it's like having boundaries with like a lot of times it's family. A lot of times their family like sabotages their, oh, like I made this cake, like you're not going to eat it. It's like, well, that's not really aligned with my goals, but it's like that kind of they're not having the support. Like how do you kind of set boundaries? Like how do you lay that down and have that conversation?
It's so tricky. Oh my gosh. I think boundaries are something that we're always constantly going to be reinventing and relearning how to do, and we're always going to learn how to be better at. But I don't think there's a wrong way to set boundaries. But when you learn how to take care of yourself again, you learn what your basics are, right? And when you know your basics, you know what your standards are putting because you're doing this for yourself. And
Mhm.
when you're putting boundaries and you're like, okay, like say it's something with your diet that you don't want to do when you go to family and you don't want that cake, it's setting that boundary that saying, I'm doing this for my health. I'm doing this because it's going to make me feel better ultimately. And when you set that boundary, you're choosing yourself over someone else's opinion of what you're doing in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think family, there's a lot of guilting into it sometimes because we want to please them. We want them to make us feel welcomed, or we want to feel welcomed in it. But, it's important to know that no matter who the person is, if they truly care about you and they're truly meant to be in your life, they're not gonna disrespect your boundaries like that. And if they do, then they're not someone that you probably should be letting in your life constantly or having that sort of access to you, I like to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
I think boundaries start with basically just saying what you're worth for yourself, what you're setting up for yourself, and how you're taking
Mhm.
care of yourself, and saying that to someone else or saying how you should be taking care of to someone else.
Yeah, 100%. It's tough, it's really hard. I mean, my
Yeah.
mom to this day, and you've seen my Instagram, like I am all about like, and with our clients, like we like moderation, like have cake, have tacos, have like a good time, drink alcohol if you drink. Like I think it's so important to do that. My mom still to this day like comments on my food, and I'm like, dude, can you back off? And it's like it's so hard with family because like you can choose your friends and like yeah, if your friends are like giving you a hard time and then you're like, I don't like this person anymore. You can kind of end that relationship with like family. It's really tough. Like any tips for that? Because I know obviously, yeah, now we're after the New Year's, like it's not mattering as much, but like any tips for that in terms of like with family who you can't really choose who
I
choose
always feel like it's mom's job to comment on what we eat. I feel
dude,
like
right?
as unhealthy as it is, I feel like it's inevitable no matter who your mom is, no matter
Yeah.
what background you come from. But in that, I think it's important to know, I think, that it's not always malicious intent, so you don't always have to
Totally.
respond that way.
Yeah.
Um, Even if it takes maybe taking that piece and just putting it to the side for a little bit, that's what it's
Yeah.
gonna be. But I think just being clear about your boundaries on why you're setting up this goal. If you're saying that I'm not eating dessert because I'm trying to eat healthier, I'm trying to eat cleaner, and just say that directly. Because the people
Yeah.
that do care about you, they are gonna respect that boundary for you and be
Yeah.
like, okay, and they will want to support you in ways that they can. And
Yeah.
if not offering you that piece of cake, or even if another person, like I do talk to my brother a lot of times when I'm with my family, and he does help me reinforce force those boundaries for myself.
That's
So
good.
even just having like a little comrade or something on the side to
Totally.
enforce with you makes you feel a little bit less alone too in it.
Yeah. That's great. Is your brother older or younger?
He's younger. He's only 3 years younger though.
Yeah, so he's like your advocate. He's like,
Yeah,
your role model.
exactly.
That's
And I feel
great.
like that's what siblings are there for too sometimes.
Yeah. So we're in the new year. If you're listening to this, it's probably yeah, it's the week after New Year's, week of the 8th. But yeah, a lot of people are, looking to get healthy, get in shape, set goals. what's kind of like, in terms of goal setting, like what do you kind of recommend? What's the best picture for someone to actually like set it and achieve it, and not just have another New Year's resolution that they fell back on, or time that they attempted.
Well, I always think like with New Year's resolutions especially, I think it's such a pressure that we have to achieve it. Like especially like in fitness, we're like the gyms are always so crazy in January and February, and then we kind of see them start to dwindle off later in the year.
Yeah.
And I think because we have all this pressure on, this is going to be the year that we're going to change everything. Like our lives are like not feeling great in 2023. 2024 is going to be the year to change everything. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So I think with needing to like put goal setting, it's looking on what you're happy. Like I always like to tell my clients, like, look at what your happiest life is. Like, what's your
Mhm.
dream life going to be? And know that it doesn't have to happen tomorrow, next week,
Right.
next month, or even at the end of the year, but start working backwards and taking the steps in what's going to take today. And I think with the resolution, you could kind of take those little checkpoints in that journey
Mhm.
as your goals and as your resolutions so it doesn't seem so discouraging to yourself. And
Yeah.
also just be more compassionate to yourself like on this journey and especially with health and fitness like it's a
Yeah.
day-to-day thing and being in your body that's the progress you're going off of and you're seeing it and you're living in it day to day.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what's your take? Because obviously your brother was like, obviously a huge help in terms of you kind of laying boundaries and seeing. But I feel like a lot of us need, and not even I tell my clients, like, not even just a coach, like you need how do you really enroll people in what you're trying to do so you can have the extra layer of accountability, maybe.
I guess with myself is you have to I personally think like if you think you're worth something like if you think you're worth like achieving this goal, you already believe you could do it.
Yeah.
And I always look at it as like my future self or like your higher version of yourself is like wait like she knows all the answers. She has all the ideas, knows the plan and everything. You're just not there yet. And
Mm,
learning that if I want to do this, if I want to achieve it, what are the choices I'm going to make to get myself there? And trusting that you're going to keep choosing that decision time and time again to keep yourself consistent with your goal.
yeah.
And I think we like that almost puts that pressure on you, or not that pressure, but that
Right. No, 100%.
responsibility on you. Yeah. And while other people can be around to support you and you could share your ideas with them, it's not their responsibility to make you happy or to get you to a
Yeah.
happy place in your life. It's going to be you and it's going to be you need to take accountability for your actions, for your decisions, and for the way you choose to look at life and ways that you can get it or you can't.
I think that's so great. I mean, yeah, I feel like I could just like clip that right there and that'll be our
Perfect.
podcast. No, but it was like, I mean, I remember you talking about on your podcast, kind of like not fake it till you make it, but like act as if, like act like how would that person that's already where I want to be, how would they be acting, you know? And I think that's so important and hard at the same time, in
Yeah.
terms of like laying it out. Um, I forget where I was going with that, but yeah, I guess yeah, I get that's it's super helpful, and I think a lot of times it's really just about giving yourself compassion and just like laying out things, not putting so much pressure on yourself. I think as humans, we put so much freaking pressure on ourselves to like succeed in all aspects of our life, especially if you're more type A, which is most of our listeners. Really trying to get the best health, best career, best
Mhm.
family person. And which is tough a lot of times. It's just really stepping back.
Yeah, it's so frustrating too because I feel like especially with that way of thinking, it's such a problem with comparison culture too because you're seeing what
Yeah.
everyone else is achieving and you're trying to follow in those footsteps. You're not
Hmm.
looking at it as you're going to create your own path to achieve that.
Yeah, dude, that's why I hate influencer culture. It's like, oh, this is
No.
how this person does it. You know what I mean? It's like, do exactly that. And then like we're comparing ourselves to this influencer and she's doing it, or he or she is doing it a certain way, and we're like trying to mirror that. And it's like, that's why I'm like always like coaches over influencers, coaches over influencers, because influencers will tell you like how they did it, right? But coaches like
Yeah.
work with you on your specific goals and what's going to work for you specifically, and not, compare.
Exactly, because we're all our own unique individual person. So we're not gonna
Mhm.
all have the same background. We're not all gonna have the same future even.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was gonna say with that, but I think with that, it's creating like your own goal and knowing that oh that's
Yeah.
what I was gonna say. But I always like to tell my clients and even I say on my podcast too, it's there's just as many ways to live life and to be successful as there are people on this earth because we're
Yeah.
all that individualized.
Hmm.
And when you look at it through that life, you can get ideas and get inspiration from influencers, from all these other people, but it's only going to be a part in what's going to make you you.
Yeah. It's figuring out what's going to work for you specifically. And speaking of which, how, if any of our listeners are listening to this or watching this on YouTube, like how can, first of all, do you work with any men or it's all women?
I do have a few men, yes.
Okay. How can people work with you? Like, how can they get a hold of you? How can they kind of like figure out and, yeah, eventually work with you on some, maybe they want to achieve some goals and all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, you could either book with me through my website, or you send me an email at dcarnivele@gmail.com. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram, and I answer my DMs on there regularly. I post almost daily on TikTok. Or you could even just you could send the link or email me through the link in my podcast too, if I want to make it make sense on Spotify or iTunes.
Perfect. And I'll put a link in all the show notes too with like everything you just said there with like TikTok, Instagram. But yeah, slide into her DMs, go on her website, if you're definitely interested in working with her. Listen to her podcast, listen to Danielle's podcast. It's really freaking good. I was like really blown away and before I know the the reason we're having this is because I cold emailed you. I was just like,
Yeah.
I loved your pod. I listened to an episode. I was like, oh, this is like really good. I want to see if she's open to coming online because I feel like there's so much value and you're just so real and authentic. Like you just kind of you're a straight shooter. You tell your own experience. You curse a lot, which is I love, and it just such good nuggets in each episode. Also, one thing I did notice, I wanted to ask you, um, because you're so well thought out. I'm like a mess. I'm everywhere. I'm like going on 8 things. I forget my question. I
Uh,
forget what I'm saying. Do you write your stuff out? Because it's so well thought out and like you don't have filler words.
In the beginning, I didn't because I was so eager to just get a podcast started.
Yeah.
I was just like, and I'm not like very, like I used to be when I was working, and then that
Yeah.
all kind of shifted. So I was like, you know what? I know I want to do a podcast. I know I want to put this out. I'm just going to start doing it because I'm psyching myself out too much by the planning of it too much.
Mm,
And so I started out by just doing like little
interesting.
topics every week and just
Yeah.
freeballing it. But now I have a little bit more of an outline just to keep me on
Yeah.
track. Otherwise they're all going to be like an hour and 40 minutes long.
No, that's great. I mean, it sounds like it's so articulate and it's so well thought out. You guys, if you're sick of my ranting, like go to Danielle's. If you need yeah, if you're just like, you have the nutrition, you have the training plan. If you're having trouble just like doing it or sticking to it long term or self-sabotage, all in all out mindset, any of these things that kind of messes up on the journey, like go please listen to this podcast. Make It Make Sense by Danielle. It's really freaking good. It's got more than 30 episodes. You can dive deep into those archives. And they're very well thought out and well put together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else you want to leave our listeners off with here? Anything that you want to say before we hop off?
I guess just like in spirit of the new year, just being open to learning new things, new mindsets, new possibilities in life, and just know that don't staying discouraged. I think there's a lot of beauty that we can learn with uncertainty and diving into the unknown. I think it's a way to just explore what else is possible in life and not so much of living life one way, but opening that mindset on, okay, what else works for other people can happen to me too. And just moving through life knowing that just as something bad can happen to you, something good can happen too. And I think there's a lot of power when we look at ourselves in that light too.
Yeah, it's almost like a beginner's mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Just staying open and yeah, just kind of, I think we kind of get into this like black and white thinking, like, oh, it didn't work. I'm gonna can give up. It's like, no, just keep trying, like try a different way and just like be open to different ideas and ways of doing it and be compassionate with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting too, like when you kind of almost self-doubt yourself, I think that's also a way that you can look inward and be like, okay, well, why do I think this way about myself? And I think it's an opportunity even to learn a little bit more about you and what makes you you. And I think the more we kind of can question ourselves on why we think we're so bad, we can kind of start to see the good in us and start to bring out like our strengths and what makes us us.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much for hopping on. I really appreciate it. I know we went way over what we're gonna go through, but
Thank you so much for having me.
yeah,
This was
if you're open
fun.
to it, I definitely want to have you in the future on. I think there's so like I was just like thinking of all these questions and areas we could have dove into. I know we talked so much about food and relationship with food on this episode, and that was kind of like the main theme, but I think there's so much with like motivation and just starting. I think some people have like such trouble just starting it. Whether it's paralysis by analysis, but I'd love to dive in with you in the future. So thank you so much for hopping on. You're so cool.
Thank you. I love being on this. This was so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, this is super fun. Well, I appreciate it. And yeah, again, guys, I'm gonna put everything in the show notes. Slide into the DMs, hit her up on her website. Yeah, if you're anyone that's just looking to get more of life, or you just want some direction, or having trouble like me with balancing everything everywhere all at once, hit Danielle up. She's awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been so great being on here.
Yeah.